And I couldn't imagine a better transition to our last item of the day before we do give the stage back to Mo Kasich to continue her talk. But we are heading right into a panel and town hall on our specialty societies' opportunity to stand up to corporate medicine. And it is worth noting that we are that one specialty with two competing specialty societies, which does make us unique and gives us a little bit of a different angle as far as, what specialty society do we work within? Do we write one off as a lost cause? Do we work to change it? And that's something that we'll get right into here. And we'd love your continued insight in the future. And moving forward, I think, as we had mentioned, making this a much larger coalition amongst patients, but also all specialties is where we're really headed with this. And that's the only way we're going to win. So without further ado, I'll introduce Dr. Vicki Norton, who is an emergency physician and board member for the American Academy of Emergency Medicine, who's going to be moderating the panel. And I'll let her introduce everyone else here. We are condensing the sort of last two talks into this. So Dr. McNamara will give an introduction of the issues after we get started. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. And that was a great talk by Drs. Conda and Francis. I really think that highlights what's going on in dermatology, which is really an echo of what's happening in emergency medicine. And you brought up some interesting points about conflict of interest, which is a great lead into what we're going to be talking about now. So thank you so much for everyone coming and participating in this panel discussion. We're going to talk about ACEP's opportunity to stand up to corporate medicine. And as most emergency physicians know, the American College of Emergency Physicians represents the largest portion of emergency doctors. And so we're going to be leading a discussion on some resolutions that have been put forth, and Dr. McNamara will kind of give us his overview on all of that. So I'd just like to take a minute to introduce everybody. So first we have Dr. Deborah Fletcher. She's a community emergency physician practicing in Shreveport, Louisiana. And she's board certified in both emergency medicine and pediatrics. And she's a counselor to the American College of Emergency Physicians annual meeting next month. So she'll have a good perspective on that. And next is Dr. Bob McNamara. He's professor and chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at the Lewis Katz School of Medicine at Temple University. And he's past president of the American Academy of Emergency Medicine and one of the founders of AAM. He currently serves as the chief medical officer of the AAM physician group. Dr. Lisa Moreno is the current president of the American Academy of Emergency Medicine and professor of emergency medicine, director of research, diversity, and the Latino Scholars Program at Louisiana State University in New Orleans. She has received multiple awards, is an NIH Pride Research Scholar, and recipient of numerous research grants. Next, we have Dr. Terry Mulligan. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, and he was the director of the University of Maryland International EM program for 10 years. He's a board member of the American Academy of Emergency Medicine and vice president of the International Federation for Emergency Medicine. Dr. Arthur Smolensky is a partner, chief financial and chief operating officer in Middle Tennessee Emergency Physicians, an independent private practice group in the Nashville area. Dr. Smolensky is also an assistant professor, director of informatics and documentation with the University of Tennessee, Nashville, and Murfreesboro Emergency Medicine Residency. He's also the secretary for the AAM physician group and secretary treasurer of the Tennessee chapter division of AAM. And finally, Mr. Bob Wozniak is an attorney and a partner at Freed, Canner, London, and Millen, LLC, with offices in the greater Chicago and Philadelphia metropolitan areas. Since 2001, Mr. Wozniak has been involved in complex commercial litigation with a primary emphasis on antitrust class action cases. So his perspective is going to be very valuable for this panel. Prior to engaging in private law practice, Mr. Wozniak also worked as a trial attorney for the United States Department of Justice Antitrust Division. Thank you all for coming. So Dr. McNamara, you can lead us off and give us your talk on what ACEP should do.
Can I get you, share?
Say again?
I need to share my screen.
I am not doing the Zoom, so somebody else. Okay, there you go.
So I'm going to blow through a couple of these since we were short on time. But this is the essential question I think you asked me to talk about. I mentioned this earlier. It started out correctly. The original Constitution and bylaws talked about private practice, that we wouldn't fee split, we wouldn't let non-physicians practice emergency medicine. But the rules were changed. Those bylaws that were just talked about were actually changed by those that were making a profit off of other emergency physicians, and they actually shut the press off. It'll be interesting to hear from the attorney. The main defense has been we can't talk about this because it's antitrust. We're an organization of competitors, and they've supported the corporate industry multiple times. I've got a whole line of quotes from past presidents and speakers of the council saying, contract management groups have been good for emergency medicine. And I mentioned before, they've effectively shut off the younger generation by having locked the membership. Every resident in the country pretty much has to join ACEP as a co-member of EMRA. So what did this lead to? Well, we have two societies. I don't know if that was the right thing or the wrong thing, but I tell you, there was a lot of frustration back in the early 90s when we started the Academy. We're the only one, the Academy's the only one that was fighting corporate control. I cannot think of a single thing against lay ownership that the ACEP has done. I know there are folks in the audience that are involved. I saw Henry there who's running for the board. No definitive action, which is appalling, given what we've heard here during this day. Just the last talk. They can go into the fact that the patients are getting many more biopsies. I've read his literature. The patients are getting abused by private equity. So we're at a state where we have a large amount of control, a lot of dissatisfaction, and of course quality of care and high bills. And their own membership is highly dissatisfied. Now, this is a little bit of a fuzzy slide because we couldn't get the real hard copy. We kind of somehow this leaked out from a task force. I guess it wasn't supposed to leak, but this is my understanding. The 2019 council asked the college to study the effects of private equity, and this slide came out, and now it's gone into the netherworld. But you see that on job satisfaction, we've got a humongous number of physicians that says corporatization has affected them. And then it's also affected the quality of care. So, strong negative and moderate negative impact. So the own membership, and there's studies that go back that we heard earlier with the young radiologists, 86% want to work for physician-owned groups. I can show you old studies that say the same thing about emergency physicians, surveyed ACEP members. They want to work for democratic groups, for physician-owned groups, yet we've ignored this. So I rejoined college and I put forward 3 resolutions. Apparently, I've learned that unlike the Pennsylvania Medical Society, where if a resolution gets referred, the board actually comes back and gives a report on what they did and how they handled the referral. Maybe somebody can correct me, but I'm being led to believe that these can just go to die, and that I may have been snookered into referral, and these are just going to die on the vine, and we're not going to get substantive answers to them. But these are the numbers. These are the general titles: transparency on billing collections, due process in the corporate practice of medicine. To quickly run through those. So again, refer to the board of directors. There was a statement made saying we believe in transparency. They wouldn't take my word shall, they took the word should, kind of weak, but the real teeth of it was that no member of the college will deny another member access to what is billed and paid in their name. That got referred. They'll seek legislation or regulation to ensure revenue cycle management companies, which have it, one push of the finger, they can tell you what's billed and paid in their name. Because, we talk to these groups as part of the AM physician group, like, yeah, we have the data. We're just not allowed to push it to you by those that hold the contracts. And that no entity, be it a staffing company, a physician group, a hospital, whatever, that denied a member of ACEP that information could be part of ACEP. Can't advertise, can't have booths, can't run big shindigs. So that was the transparency resolution. Due process, similar kind of things. No member will deny another member the right to due process in front of their peers and the medical staff. And again, any entity was denied that cannot be part of the fabric of ACEP, and the members can't be asked to waive it. Again, applying equally across the board. CMDs, hospitals, yes, academic medical centers. We would just take a stance at the professional society that this is a basic right for physicians. Corporate practice one, prepare a review of it for the membership to be available as a PDF file, electronically available so they could understand corporate practice and what fee splitting is about. And then if a group was threatened by ACEP to actually have the group, a physician-owned group, could turn to them for legal expertise, a written opinion on is it legal for this private equity company to take over my practice in state X. And in those states with a ban on corporate practice of medicine to join with radiology, anesthesia, other hospital-based specialties, and the state society, and petition the authorities that there be an examination within that state on the corporate practice of medicine, and then finally convene a meeting of specialties affected by PE, which of course our dermatology colleagues would be invited to. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I mean, transparency, protect the patients, don't see us as greedy, avoid being part of a fraudulent bill, a fee split. Gender pay equity relies on transparency. If you don't know what they're getting paid, you can't really judge it. And this is already policies by the AMA and CMS, and we've talked about feeling exploited. Due process, we talked about this before. Profits, over patients, and lawyers can't be owned by non-lawyers. So, I mean, I think this is a fight that, when we go to court or we go in front of legislators, a lot of them are lawyers, like, well, look, it's not okay for you to be owned by private equity. Why is it okay for a physician? I mean, the client relationship is more important than the patient relationship. So I think Congress needs to take a stand for the patients, their members, and the families of those members, because, when we're affected by it, our families feel it, and certainly for the image of the specialty. So I will stop and let us go into the panel. Ran through that a little bit quick. There we have it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So could you just explain again what the status is of your resolutions so that all of them were referred to the board?
Yeah. So, last year was COVID. It was a virtual format. And then there was, asynchronous testimony. You could comment on the resolutions on the net. You're supposed to keep it limited to like a 2-minute spiel. And then, you were essentially on Zoom, trying to argue these resolutions. And, I didn't realize it was such a cop-out. I apparently know now, and I guess, kind of pisses me off. But referral is, we'll give it to the board because the board in its wisdom, will, decide what is right for us. And apparently the board doesn't have to do any of that. They can just ignore it, which is, I was surprised. And there are, it's the old guard. Who is the board? The board are people that believe in what the college has done. There's, a USAC's person on the board, and, the past presidents, and I'm not, a lot of the past presidents, who have influence have been, Team Health and Vision. There's, kind of the Politburo, the influence. I don't really know, council, what the exact breakdown of they are, like how many of them work for private equity. But, when you're making the money, you're not working shifts. You got time to go to these meetings. And that's what happened to emergency medicine. The Carl Mangels, the Leonard Riggs, they spoke the language, and they just snookered the whole specialty society into stripping the bylaws. And, unfortunately, I mean, we went way down the pathway And nobody was really recognizing this other than, the occasional letter to the editor, which then got shut off. And then Keeney writes the book and blows it up. And there you have AAM. And now you got Take EM back, because the younger generation is seeing the same stuff that, we saw at AAM back in the early 90s, that the game is tilted and it's not in our favor. So I'm interested in hearing to talk about this antitrust. Can't speak about this. No, this is antitrust. The FTC says you can speak about things that you think affect society, the membership. And what are we talking about today? We're talking about ripping off the patient. Doctors can't see what they're supposed to see, which is the bill, and the patients are getting zapped with the bill. I mean, this is fairly evident. And now they actually twisted AAM's own antitrust lawyer statement in their responses. Even AAM says that ACEP would be at risk because we're bigger. What they don't realize is that the whole statement said, yeah, you can do this stuff. There are some risks, but what are you? Are you a physician organization, or are you trying to keep your big fat headquarters and protect all this money you've accumulated from the members? You're trying to affect this specialty. And that's what pisses me off the most. They got a lot of money, they got a lot of influence, and they're not using it for the bedside physician.
So that's a great point. And I think that in terms of the concerns that ACEP has regarding antitrust and excluding certain advertising and donations and things like that from their professional society, Dr. Moreno, can you comment on how AAM avoids these concerns? Because we did get our own antitrust opinion from lawyers. What does AAM do to avoid this?
So, the whole antitrust thing it's the Sherman Antitrust Act that was passed by Congress in the late 1800s, and it deals with organizations that have a monopoly. So the federal government controls certain things since you are a monopoly. So the AAM is not the only organization in emergency medicine that emergency physicians can join. There is also no mandate to join AAM. It's a voluntary organization. Because of that, we are able to maintain our freedom to give our opinions about issues that are affecting the practice of medicine, are affecting the practice of EM, are affecting our patients. Now, ACEP, honestly, I'm not a lawyer. That's my, disclaimer. I'm not an MD/JD, but I don't believe that ACEP should be concerned about antitrust because they are not the only emergency medicine organization, and it is not mandatory to join them. Now, ABEM has to have some degree of caution because you must be certified by ABEM, and you cannot be certified by any other certifying board. Although there are some out there that are trying to get people's money, but they're not the officially recognized by hospitals, by JCO, et cetera, et cetera. So they have to exercise some degree of caution. And certainly the ACGME has consistently complained, sorry, I shouldn't use that word, has consistently stated that they are concerned about a lawsuit because they are the only board that is certifying emergency medicine residency training program. Now, I've discussed this with my board at AAM, we are seriously interested in having a lawyer who would be willing to make this a test case and to try to see whether ACGME and the RRC for AAM actually do qualify as a monopoly because they are an educational organization. They are not selling anything to anybody. So the problem that I've encountered is every time I try to find a lawyer, I cannot find a lawyer who will work for free. Unfortunately, they're not like us. We're all here giving our free time, not getting paid for anything that we're doing. We do things for the benefit of humanity, but I have not been able to find an attorney who is willing to do something for the benefit of our patient population and the benefit of humanity. But I'm going to put it out there. I would love to see a test case. Ruth Bader Ginsburg made her knocks by doing that. She actually took a test case to the Supreme Court where there were public advertisements in newspapers saying, here's this job, factory supervisor, males, $10,000 a year, females, $7,500 a year. And she said, I am going to take this to the Supreme Court and argue it. And she did it for free, and she won, and she changed the face of law, and she changed women's opportunities for women in this country. I'd like to put it out there. If there's an attorney who would like to become famous by taking an important case and do it for free the way RBG did, come forward and let AAM know.
Mr. Wozniak, I think that's your cue.
I think that was directed possibly toward me. So a
It's
lot
all
has been-
attorneys, because I cannot find a single attorney who is willing to work for free. Everyone I've talked to said, oh, you're going to have to get together some money. We charge $400 an hour. If you can get together the money, we can do it. And AAM is not rich.
Right.
Because we don't take money from corporate medical groups.
Understood. There's a lot has been said, and I should have maybe jotted down some notes, but I'll respond to your more recent comments. I mean, yes, lawyers want to get paid. My firm actually does in some ways work for free in that we do primarily contingency litigation, but that's, where we have a big class action. We don't charge for our time or our expenses until the case resolves favorably for us, either through a settlement or, a verdict or, a court ruling. So I have not actually dug in with Terry or others on this panel about, I think what you were getting at is now challenging the monopoly control of the training aspect. That's something I'd certainly be willing to look at. And if there's a case to be made, I mean, I'm happy to do, a little bit of digging myself on a pro bono basis. And if it's something that turns into a viable case that my firm is interested in, then, that's one potential angle here. But getting back to, I guess, what Bob McNamara's main points on these resolutions and this the ACEP hiding behind this cloak of antitrust concern. I mean, yes, potentially there are some antitrust concerns. The Sherman Act doesn't deal only with monopoly power. It was put into place, in the late 1800s, as you said, Dr. Moreno. The main goal was to break up the trust that existed at the time and controlled so many parts of our economy. But it primarily is aimed at preventing combinations, conspiracies, cartels that engage in restraints of trade. So price fixing, colluding on price. Those are a lot of the private cases that my firm does. A lot of those. The monopoly aspect, I mean, having a monopoly is not in and of itself illegal, but the unlawful use of monopoly power is what the Sherman Act is aimed at addressing, Section 2 of the Sherman Act. Now, the way that the case law has developed over time, restraints of trade address things like exclusionary practices, and that's what ACEP is purporting to be concerned about here. If they adopt these bylaws, are they in danger of being sued by a CMG who says you're wrongfully excluding us from your group, and you have these opinion letters. You have also, I think most importantly, what I'm most intrigued about is going back to 1983, the FTC letter, which addresses what the American Academy of Ophthalmology did at that time. And it's an opinion letter, or an advisory letter, I guess it is. So it's not a ruling, but as far as I know, the AAO was never sued on the basis of putting these principles of ethics into place. And I think this is a roadmap for how ACEP could adopt these bylaws and make them part of essentially or I'm sorry, the resolutions and make them part of their bylaws. I mean, I'm looking at the bylaws of ACEP right now, and in the bylaws, they describe membership eligibility. And first and foremost, they say that members agree to abide by the code of ethics for emergency physicians. I think these resolutions are entirely consistent with my understanding of the code of ethics for emergency physicians. So I think their antitrust, I guess, to put it I guess their antitrust concerns are overstated at minimum, at best. And while there are some concerns, I think that these resolutions can also be viewed as pro-competitive, which is something that a court would look at if litigation were to ensue. You're basically saying all players should be on a level playing field. And right now the CMGs have a competitive advantage by being able to engage in, non-transparent billing, not affording due process rights. I mean, that gives them an advantage, an economic advantage over people who play fairly. So I would not be, I think they're hiding behind that cloak, and I don't think it's a realistic threat. I mean, yes, a lawsuit might take place, but I mean, can you imagine what a CMG comes in and says, we're being wrongfully excluded because we want to, our business practice depends on non-transparent billing or denial of due process. I mean, that's just not, I wouldn't want to make that argument. And I don't, so in short, those are my views.
So this is one of the major issues that's been discussed at AAM is the fact that corporate medical groups have been, and I don't have the exact statistics in front of me, but I'm going to say that in the past 3 to 4 years, about 80%, if not more, of the certifications for residency training programs have been given to corporate medical sponsored residency programs. We believe it's a conflict of interest because they are interested in making a profit, and that is in direct conflict with providing education, which is very time consuming and expensive if you do it correctly. They put individuals into faculty positions who have never had any academic experience before. There are people who are research directors. I've been told, and again, I don't have the statistics on this, so this is hearsay and not a fact, but I've been told that they have some research directors who've, maybe been middle author on a paper. So our position is that this is inferior training and that these individual programs should not be certified. And we've been asking the ACGME to raise the bar so that residency education for the field that frankly and honestly requires the most intelligent people practicing it. Emergency medicine is the only field where we are treating undifferentiated patients. And we are also treating patients in extremis of their disease. And so emergency medicine must have the smartest and most highly skilled of all physicians practicing in our specialty. And so training has got to be rigorous. And we have gone to the ACGME and said this is a conflict of interest for them to run a CMG and a residency training program. And we also feel that they are decreasing the value of residency training and the quality of residency training. And ACGME is telling us because of Sherman Antitrust, they can't do anything. And this is something that we feel should be challenged. This is in a public interest. And this also deals with the workforce issues. And this also deals with the fact that, the CMGs are using these residents as cheap labor. You hear interns from these programs counting how many patients they see per hour. Interns should not be trained to count the number of patients they see per hour. Interns should be trained to count the number of times they guess the hematocrit correctly or guess the finding on the CT scan before it's read. That's what they need to learn to do, is be a good doctor, not be a fast, half-assed physician. So we are looking for an attorney who is willing to take this case.
I mean, my opinion is that the ACGME issue, yes, you can address that, but that's a small subset of what's wrong in emergency medicine. We have, they're going to say, and their argument has already been out there, hospitals employ the residents, not us. And these are non-envisioned employees, team health employees at these residency programs. The hospitals are asking us to create these programs, or we might lose the contract. And oh, by the way, private groups are also doing the same kind of thing. But the issue here is what Mr. Wozniak said, is that we have our major, bigger than the academy, bigger than Take AEM Back, put together, right? With a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of power, that now has the power, but is not using it because of a fear of antitrust, that somebody will say, speaking up for transparency, for that whole list of reasons that I said, start where you want, protect the patients, non-engaging fee splitting, gender equity, all the good reasons. They're going to sue us and say, we don't think these doctors should see what's billed and paid in their name. Even though in the Code of Federal Regulations, CMS says the physician is entitled to review what is billed and paid in their name. That ain't going to go anywhere. It's bull deflection. And the AMA, the highest body of all of organized medicine, says the same thing. They say in one of their policies, we're entitled to see what is billed and paid in our name, and the AMA will provide assistance to physicians denied such information. I wrote that resolution, went through the Pennsylvania Medical Society, it went to the AMA, and they added the words, and we will provide assistance. That's what they're going to argue. Same thing with due process. Wait a second. You mean my physician has less rights than the guy sweeping the floor? My physician is supposed to advocate for me? The 60 Minutes showed it. The research paper showed it, that we can't. So this is a crime that is being committed against the bedside emergency physicians. The ACEP hiding behind the antitrust statements. That is a crime, okay? And it's hurting us and it's hurting our patients. Okay, so that's all there is to it. And somebody asked, what do you think? Well, look, ACEP does all this other kind of stuff, but what is more important than us with our patients? There's nothing more important going on. We are losing our specialty. We are all going to be owned by insurers in 10 years. And then the game's freaking over. We're just cogs in the wheel. Look, I'm checking out soon, right? I turned 65 in 2 months. I got a son, though. He's an emergency physician. I don't want to see him practicing under this crap for the rest of his career. This is, I can't think of anything more important. Look, I'm an academic, right? I started out, doing interosseous research, and my eyes were I was shattered by what Jim Keeney told me about what goes on in the real world. And it only took a little bit of digging to see it out. The reader's responses to the rape of emergency medicine. Our colleagues suffer under the corporate practice of medicine. They suffer under it. Okay, well, you've all heard it if you've been part of the American Academy's board. You've heard the members and the non-members calling us saying, I'm leaving this specialty because of the abuse. So I don't know, what the panel, where you want to go, but I'm very clear that this is wrong for emergency medicine. And I just don't know where to go if we get some bullshit answer that, we're referred, but we're not doing anything. Like I heard there's going to be a QR code that, this company didn't answer the question, but you ought to know they didn't answer whether they have transparency or whether they have due process. I mean, if that's the answer we're getting, then, I don't know, Mitch, you want to burn them down. I don't know if it's worth another go around, change.org, that's a great idea. Let's get the rank and file. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do and take Ian back, is to get the bedside docs and say, why aren't you sticking up for us? All right, I'm occupied too much time here. I'm going to get off the soapbox.
So yeah, you're bringing up a good point. The topic of the panel is that we want to discuss how ACEP can help us rid our specialty of the corporate practice of medicine, of private equity-backed groups. And part of that was discussing Dr. McNamara's resolutions and ACEP's concern over the resolutions that they would be subject to antitrust litigation. The ACGME issue is also very important, but not quite the topic we're talking about today. Dr. Mulligan, you had your hand raised. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think the CMG issues combined with the ACGME kind of abuses, that it's not just CMGs that are abusing the residency programs. Dr. Moreno, you're right. Something like 9 out of the last 12 emergency medicine residencies have been founded by these either CMGs or private hospital groups. And they're been shown to be placed not in places of the greatest need, but in places that those corporations don't yet have coverage over. And we all know residents tend to stay where they've been trained. And so they're kind of creating their own corral, in addition to reducing the quality of the training and replacing the trainees with NPs and PAs. But that's a smaller part of the bigger picture, being the corporate practice of contract management groups and hospital groups and medical insurance, which are now buying hospitals, and the multiple different abuses of all these groups. It's all evidence of business moving into the doctor-patient relationship. So this big whale, floating whale of healthcare dollar is being attacked by these 4 or 5 major sharks, the insurance companies, pharma, CMGs, private equity, and they're all getting their piece. And eventually they all get their piece at the expense of the patient. And they do this by reducing quality. They keep going past the meat into the bone. And there's, that's the major approach, I think. That's the reason ACEP was formed. That's the reason emergency medicine was formed, was because things were not being done correctly. Things were not being done adequately for patients who were in the ER. And so a new training program, a new college, a new board, a whole new era was started. Unfortunately, I think they had been misled, or somehow, for a whole bunch of reasons, they're not representing the majority of physicians who are in this field, and not representing patients as well as they profess to 52 years ago when they wrote their first bylaws.
Dr. Fletcher, since you are a counselor for the upcoming meeting, do you have any comment about what ACEP is doing or what they can do?
I do. This is actually going to be my first in-person council meeting. Last year was the one with asynchronous testimony on Zoom. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out. But Dr. McNamara's resolutions were debated, but I agree with him. I didn't realize once it goes to the board, that's kind of like a no man's land, and we're not quite sure what happens after that. So we're hoping that they would come back with something, but in the meantime, I was pleased to hear like dermatology was able to have someone removed from their board who wasn't actually speaking out for the dermatologists, the individual doctors. ACEP could continue on with the status that they've been doing, but so many things have come to a point at this point with private equity into medicine, with the replacement of doctors by NPPs, with residents not able to find jobs, with the dilution of positions. And it's really time to do something. We are hoping maybe to get some new board members who are more progressive, anti-private equity. I see Dr. Pizzelle's in the audience too. So this is a big year for us, and to make some changes, I think it's going to take more than one cycle. I love the Take Medicine Back and Mitch, and they're kind of getting people talking about things, but it's going to take, maybe another cycle or two for more people to get interested.
And it's sad to say that these issues have been around for the last 30 years. And as Dr. McNamara pointed out, the original ACEP bylaws actually had much higher ethical standards for people that were, higher up in the medical organization. So, I mean, is it a conflict of interest for somebody to be a part owner of a corporate medical group, or hold an upper level management position in a corporate group, and also hold a board position or an executive position in a medical society? I feel like it's rhetorical.
100%. And I've written about that, and you can file the letters to the editor and Emergency Medicine News. You go in there the Lake Health deal that AM was involved with. Emergency resistance came to us because Rebecca Parker, who was, the president of ACEP, came in with Envision as the regional director and took the contract. That credential was used. Hey, and bring our company in. We have the president of the college. We have somebody on the board. It is a total conflict of interest to be part of the leadership of the specialty society and be an official foreign organization whose intent is to use the members to make a profit, okay, at the expense of patients. When I first started in emergency medicine, we would, in the academic circles, we would freak out if you had a drug company pet. You'd freak out if you used something that a company that was trying to get you to use their product. And now we've got, sponsorship all over the place of companies that are using us. It's mind-boggling how people can't see that, this is affecting the physician-patient relationship.
So I want to talk to Dr. Smolensky a little bit about this because as Mitch Lee pointed out, within 3 to 5 year PE life cycles, now 3 to 4 years into most PE buyouts, a flip likely heading toward consolidation to United Healthcare Insurance. How much time do we actually have to change ACEP from the inside?
So I think there's really not much time left. I think the reality is, the cycle is coming up. They're going to have to sell. And really, there's two options, right? Is to hit the public markets or to go to someone bigger. And someone like United Healthcare would certainly be an option for these groups. I think the real issue that we have is, who's going to act? We're talking about multiple cycles to change ACEP from the inside. I don't think we have that time. And I think the reality of any of us who have interacted with the ACEP leadership, they are fairly numb to this issue. And I would say at a minimum, highly disinterested, and they just don't want to discuss it, even the ones who work for private groups. To Bob's point where he mentions, big pharma. I remember being a medical student and it's like, you can't take a pen. It's the end of the world. Meanwhile, we have the ACEP presidents making, 400,000 plus from CMGs, but then being told by the other ACEP leaders, it didn't impact what they did at all. I think that's naive to say the least. So I think, it's groups like this. I think us on individual level trying to make change. I think the AM physician group trying to essentially scrape contract by contract to try to make a change is our best hope. I do think, we're starting to see the pendulum swing the other way. I've been involved with a few groups that are just starting up and either splitting off from true SDGs or just contracts that they have been able to kind of get back. But the numbers are dire. I think I mentioned in the chat previously, there's the group in Indianapolis. It's a fairly large group that's going to be in the process of being sold to USACs. I'm not sure if that's closed. I know of at least one other group that is near its sale. Groups have been stressed for, a number of different reasons, and it's very hard to take that back. The groups that are around, the leadership that knows how to run the business is, the number of people that know how to do that is dwindling, and there's nobody really to teach those people. And certainly if you're in a group that's, functional in a private group, you're not too keen to leave to go try to start a new one somewhere else. And I think that's a big vacuum that the AM physician group is trying to fill, but it's tough.
Thank you.
Can I jump in for just a second? Because I saw a comment from, I guess, Joe Francis commented about the Biden FTC looking into consolidation issues. And it just, to the extent that, right now we have a pretty friendly FTC from the perspective, I think, of this group and my practice, my law practice. Lena Khan is an activist director of the FTC, and I think to the extent that there's any line of communication with ACEP, or if there are reasonable discussions to be had, it should be impressed upon them that now is the time for them to take action on this. I mean, you're going to have a good FTC on your side for the next at least 3 years. And to the extent that, you know, if they have any of these antitrust fears, which I think are overblown, as I stated, you know, it's not going to be millions of dollars to defend a suit like that. That litigation only gets into those kind of price tags when you get past a motion to dismiss and you get into discovery and depositions and all of that. This is the kind of the case that they're fearing. I think I'm pretty confident could be. I mean, you're going to find out what it's about on a motion to dismiss, and I think you could get the case thrown out. And as Mitch commented, to the extent there, you know, the argument that a CMG makes is that, you know, they want the right to not be transparent. That, like Mitch says, that will put a target on their back for the FTC. And that's where you could get the FTC to come in and file an amicus brief and be very helpful if litigation like that were to take place. So I just
I just want to say something quickly. And to that point, if you're going to be the American Academy of Emergency Medicine or the American College of Emergency Physicians, if you are trying to represent EM doctors, what better sort of sword to fall on than this?
Absolutely.
You know, we had one of the ABEM, you know, leaders of the American Board of Emergency Medicine come talk to our residency, and we basically brought that up to her, like, this is the time where we're willing to do it. You know, we're talking here about corporate practice and medicine laws being skirted. Private equity has decided that it's worth the financial risk to do this. It's worth it to them. And why is it not worth it to ACEP? Why is it not worth it to ABEM to stand up? And, you know, if you get sued, go get sued. You have millions of dollars in the bank. Tons of emergency physicians would be more than happy to contribute to stand up for our rights, but they just continue to fall as if it's the end of the world to get sued. We're in a specialty where, you know, we get sued every 7 years on average. It's just kind of part of the job. And I think there is literally not a better reason for them to take a little bit of risk and stand up for the 30,000 plus emergency physicians than this topic.
I think Dr. Pizzelle has his hand up. You want to speak?
I would appreciate it. I thank you for letting me talk for a second. I hear what everybody's saying, and the reason I'm running is because I agree with that direction. I also think that now that I get to see the way the inner workings of the board and really ACEP is running, I think you're going to be surprised that the tide is turning towards this direction, not just from the ACEP membership themselves, but from leadership too. And whether or not it's because AAEM and Take EM Back is making so much noise, or just a natural progression, impossible to say. But I can say that a lot of these things represent the way the ACEP machine is slowly turning. Is it turning fast enough to make Mitch happy? Probably not. But is it turning in this direction? It is. I think all of these things are being discussed. And is it because of all of this feedback? I think it is. I think it's because everybody is bringing this up in a way that can't be ignored as a fringe concern. That it's a concern of most of the membership of ACEP. And I think you're going to see a change if you look at the way all of the candidates, or at least the 6 candidates who aren't career CMG people for board of directors this year. Everybody is saying these things, not quite as strongly as I'm saying them, but everybody's saying them. And if you look at the internal communications of the board, they're considering a lot of these things in a way that I never thought they would. I think there's a lot of institutional momentum that needs to be overcome. I think that there is not a cabal of CMG, evil Jedi who are directing the entire corporation in a bad direction. I think it's just been heading in a bad direction for so long that it's tough to change the direction of the machine. But I think we can, and the entire reason I'm running is because I think we can change it. So I just wanted to say, this is. I feel like we are closer between ACEP and this group than is generally perceived.
Thank you. And everybody vote for Dr. Pizzelle. All right. So we have time for a few more questions. If anybody wants to type anything into the chat box. Whit Fisher said, will consolidation make things get worse or faster, or just keep things going downhill at the same rate? Do they have powers the current PE groups do not have now? And I'm not sure what who's they? ACEP? If you want to unmute and ask your question out loud.
No, I mean the people that the private equity groups are selling us to. You know, there was this talk that in 3 to 5 years, they're going to try and sell everybody off. Okay, who are they selling us to? And will those people just keep doing the same thing at the same rate, or will it somehow be more catastrophic? Will the degradation accelerate? That's what I'm asking.
I'm happy to answer that. So, you know, in essence, they have two approaches, right? One, to go public, you know, hit the public markets, at which point I think you'll probably see things similar to what they are now. The other option is to basically sell to a similar or bigger size private equity type group or to industry, right? We've seen consolidation between drug companies or, pharmacies and insurers. And I think, you know, that's what we're starting to see with Sound Physicians being owned by United Healthcare. As far as the speed at which it happens, I think it's going to be regional, right? So for those of us who are familiar with pay structures around the country, Denver, you know, the hourly rate there is substantially lower than it is in, you know, Mobile, Alabama. And the reason isn't because Mobile, Alabama is rich and Denver's poor. It's simply that we now fall prey to what the market demands. And I think what we will see as far as is getting worse for emergency physicians, we're going to see this glut of emergency physicians into the marketplace, many of them poorly trained, in my opinion. And in the end, they need a job. And as I've said before, they're going to have two options, right? They can take the guy who's been practicing for 15 years, who's used to making $200 an hour, and they're talking about cutting his pay to $180, and he's very unhappy about it, and he's verbal about it. Or they can hire a new grad who's got a ton of debt, doesn't know any different, and perhaps trained at one of these sites, and they're going to offer them $150 an hour. So then now they're left with, do I hire the grumpy old guy for $180 an hour? Do I hire the new grad who needs to work a ton of hours to pay off debt at $150 an hour, and they're just going to run themselves into the ground? And so the short answer to your question is it's going to be very location dependent. The more desirable an area, the more emergency physicians that are there. And some of that is just because there's a bunch of residencies there. I grew up in Florida. When I was looking at residencies, there was, I think, 3 in the whole state, and now there's something like 18, and I'm not that old. So, you know, the numbers have grown, and so that's going to cause things to look worse in Florida, and that's going to make physicians weaker because it's going to be hard to find a job because there's, 150, 200 new grads a year, and they're all looking for jobs.
So I think Maureen had a comment.
Oh, I just thought that was like such a good question about whether consolidation how can things get any worse? Because can consolidation really make them that much worse? And having studied so many of these companies now, I would say that the lack of competition, I don't think that competition is necessarily the answer to what ails our healthcare system. But where it exists, it is certainly makes for a much better situation than where it doesn't. I've studied the LifePoint hospitals a lot. Most of them are sole community providers, but not all of them. The ones that aren't, the ones that have another hospital in the market are substantially less understaffed. People are a little bit better paid. Apollo is fixing that quickly. The other thing is, the secondary buyouts. Every time, the one thing that people don't seem to understand, or that they doesn't get enough attention, is that every time a PE firm, sells a company, a highly leveraged company to another PE firm, things only get worse. And there's a lot of collusion that I think happens with these secondary buyouts. There's just like a lot of, there's so much collusion among the private equity firms already that's been pretty well documented when it comes to club deals. There's a great lawsuit to that effect. But yeah, IPOing can give you a little reprieve from that cycle of more and more debt and overbilling and understaffing and more overbilling and more understaffing and more, funny leveraging. But it's small, it's small beer, really. Like, whether there's competition in a market is the thing that that matters most. That's why I would be really surprised if the ACEP wasn't on some level a cabal, if these companies weren't all working together. I mean, it defies common sense to me to think that, Envision and Team Health and, ACEP and US Acute Care weren't all working together, all on speed dial with one another. I can't believe it. That's my, and that's why I think that, if you do have concerns of that, any thoughts about that, especially when it comes to wage suppression, and bring it to Lena Khan. She absolutely wants to hear about this. She's very, she's got a lot on her plate right now, but a lot of energy, a lot of passion for this. And I think also, sorry, I don't, one last thing, these are companies that breaking them up would not be a complicated endeavor. It's not like breaking up Google, like break, what if you broke up Team Health into 400 different practices? It would not be that I feel like it wouldn't be that, that difficult an unwind to do. Just it make total sense.
That is how a lot of these companies started. They were started off as individual hospital groups that consolidated.
Team Health is 150 practices that have been rolled together. And every time they make an acquisition that adds debt, that, that puts, this is where I'm kind of working on a theory of private equity and antitrust, but one of the most important things to know about those, to think about this problem when it comes to antitrust is that every time a private equity firm rolls up another practice by buying it with borrowed money, right? That intensifies the typical the typical pattern that you see with consolidation of rising prices, lowering wages, more fraud, more understaffing, because of the leverage that's baked in there. Anyway, sorry, I'll shut up now, but such a good group.
Oh, thank you so much for those comments. And I think Dr. Mulligan had his hand up again.
Yeah, I think we've seen this practice of consolidation. It's not in multiple different industries. Almost every industry in the country outside of medicine is run by 2 or 3 or 4 companies. And they've all been bought up, and the bigger fish eats the smaller fish. And eventually it's 2, 3, 4 companies running almost every industry, except for medicine, except for now healthcare insurance is, and pharma is, and hospitals are becoming that way. But medical practice hasn't yet. I think I mentioned earlier, all the medical biggest hospital groups and medical practices put together, which are Kaiser, Mayo, Cleveland, and the VA. But even if you discount the VA, it's only 3 or 4%. So the 3 or 4 biggest players only own a tiny little fraction, which means the rest of the 95% are owned by 10,000 little.
Got to him. They took Terry out.
Yeah, Terry, your audio cut out. PE's colluding against you. Okay, so I think we have had a number of great comments and questions, and we're going to wrap up here in another minute or two. Dr. McNamara, did you have something else to say?
Yeah, I want to throw in the mix too. I mean, what's the next phase? We mentioned the insurance company are sitting on billions from the pandemic. So with the sound UHPD, so that's a distinct possibility. And if that happens, I mean, like, you know, who do we have to blame but ourselves for not addressing, you know, when it was just private equity, not insurance industry. The second thing that's going to happen, and it's already happening, certainly in North Jersey, is hospitals get frustrated with, you know, the complaining emergency physician, you know, the poor staffing, the squeeze in the bottom dollar, and they're kicking the groups out, and you're winding up as hospital employees, which, you know, is that better than working for PE? Probably. But is that the best form of emergency medicine? Absolutely not. I mean, I think my belief is the best form is physicians working for one another to do what's best for the patients, their colleagues, and the medical staff. And we're going to see that go away if we all shift to hospital employment. The private practice will be destroyed. I mean, you know, and it's, you know, hospitals going to suck that right up, right? You know, they did it to cardiology. So that's another distinct outcome. And again, if we want to preserve the physician-owned practice of emergency medicine, we got to act now.
Okay, I want to just leave the panel with one final question. What do you think the future of emergency medicine looks like? What do you think the future of ACEP is going to be? Is it truly a bright future, or are we on fire?
Should we raise our hands for fire?
Should we just take a vote? Who says
Well,
fire?
I think, you know, we are on fire. There's no question about it. We are on fire. But I think the fact that there have been like 80 people today that have shown up at this meeting, the fact that AAM's membership has increased in the associate member group, which is the people who have recently graduated from residency, has increased by 25%. I think that we're starting to put the fire out. And honestly, I am optimistic. I think that the young people who are coming out of residency now are committed. I think they have a global view. I think they care about patients in a way that that is encouraging. They're passionate about patient safety. They're passionate about healthcare issues. They're passionate about ending disparities. They're passionate about doing the right thing. And I think that, yes, we are on fire, but I am optimistic. And I think that that it's not idealistic optimism. I think it is realistic optimism based on what I'm seeing. There were like 80 people here today showing up at this meeting, at this summit. And there are a ton more people who would have come, but they're doing a shift because that's what we do. And the young people are showing us that they really care. And, you know, I'll tell you, Advocacy Day, guys, AAM Advocacy Day, October 19th and 20th. Dr. Norton's been tweeting a lot about it. Dr. Fletcher is very involved in advocacy. We are going to be on the Hill. We are going to be lobbying. I have 11 young people who have already signed up to come, and a whole host of other EMIG students that I've recently been in touch with who want to come. So please join us on the Hill. I know it's expensive. You're giving your time. You have to pay to come down there, but we'll treat you to a great dinner, and you'll get to hang out with a lot of the people who are at this summit. And we're going to tell the legislators what our patients need. So I am optimistic.
I have cautious optimism. I think basically, you know, we have never seen what we're seeing right now, and COVID uncovered it, right? So all along, you know, we were complaining, you know, the AAM talked about corporate practice, but the general EM grad could go out and make decent money and say, yeah, what were they talking about? Look, I found a private group, but now there's pressure, right? The younger generation felt some serious pain. Hopefully academics wake up when their match list is going to be difficult to put together this year because the word got back to the students. You can check the Reddit threads. And the corporations have just grown to the point. They've got that debt issue. They've started to cut pay, cut benefits. So, and then there's a crack in the armor of the ACEP with the 2019 resolution, with Henry saying, you know, the 2020 resolution is being discussed. So we're at an inflection point. You know, we are either going to do something or we're just going to give up, and it's going to be a weaker specialty of a bunch of cogs in the wheel. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, this is the time we've got to make a move. We got to stand up, and, you know, credit to everybody who was here today, and, you know, let's keep this ball rolling.
Okay, last comment from Terry.
Yeah, I remain cautiously optimistic as well. You know, I like to be optimistic in general, but I want to verify, kind of like a good emergency physician. I have to think, what is the worst thing this could be, and what is the worst situation that this could be that we're facing? I hope it's not, but it very well could be. And so I do think that the enthusiasm and the energy of the younger people coming through is a huge cause for optimism. I also want to couch that optimism a little bit with some, not necessarily pessimism, but supported caution, in that we don't want this to achieve death by committee. We don't want this to be swept under the rug. We don't want this to be delayed again. We did a workforce study 4 years ago, and that was delayed 4 or 5 years to give the present workforce study, which basically showed the same thing that theirs did, except we now had 4 or 5 years more of inaction. And inaction in some cases is worse than acting incorrectly. And so I want to be optimistic. I think that it is possible to resurrect this dying patient, the emergency medicine specialty, but we have to act. And I don't think it's the entire, you know, body of ACEP members or emergency physicians who are to blame. I think it's a certain pattern of human behavior. I think it is a certain pattern of toxic leadership that potentially is to blame, along with just the predatory practices of private equity and corporate practice of medicine everywhere. You know, as we've heard, this is affecting almost every specialty. So, but are we going to be the specialty that turns around, that puts our foot down, that stands up and says enough? I think we can.
Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate everybody being here and all the panelists for speaking and some great questions and comments. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Mitch Lee. I think we were going to try to show the video, the teaser trailer for the video.
Thank you, Dr. Norton, and thank you to this panel. It's been excellent. And we are 5:04. Just to give a general heads up, I think we did pretty well for time. And although it stressed me out to go overtime, I think that really means that we had a lot of passion in this. So I think what we'll do for now, I mean, people have been troopers here getting through this whole day. And we have some incredible passion. We have a bunch of people that I can't name because they're too afraid. They're putting in so much effort for this movement, yet are afraid of retaliation, which really tells me something about the dedication that they have. So I really want to thank our Wonder Woman and several other of our pseudonym colleagues here who are maybe residents, medical students, and new attendings who have a lot to lose for putting a lot of this together. And then the press, I'm just gonna drop this in here. We haven't even reached happy hour yet, but we already have a news story in MedPage today with Dr. Ming Lin. And I think for the next little bit, what we'll do is we'll show the trailer that some of you may have seen, but some of you may have not, with Dr. McNamara for the Take Medicine Back trailer. And then we'll turn the stage back over to Mo Tasic to show the rest of her PowerPoint presentation, which was extremely engaging. And then whenever people are ready, reconvene in the spatial chat section, which I think we can leave some, you should be able to find it in Kiko chat, and we'll leave some instructions here. And then we'll have a little bit of a happy hour, very unstructured. At this point, our comedian found it funny to go to Costa Rica and not have internet. So that's his joke. So we're just gonna have a nice get together. Feel free to chat with whomever is left. It has been a long day and I'm really impressed with people sticking around for this. So without further ado, this is the trailer sneak peek, and then we'll transition over to Mo.
Well, the emergency room is really an essential component of the healthcare system. Private equity, by its nature, doesn't belong in healthcare, certainly not in the emergency department. The goals of private equity are in opposition to the goals of physicians in medicine. Private equity is about profits and investors. Medicine, physicians are about the care of the patient.
The little match that I lit became like a wildfire. And, you know, as I think about this now, I realize that, you know, what really lit the match was the fact that this is a conflict between healthcare workers' right to speak up for our patients, and between corporate medicine, which favors PR and profit. A clear conflict between our ability to speak out for safety for our patients and ourselves, and the corporations' desire to increase profit and protect their publicity. Physicians all across the United States are being silenced for speaking out for their patients and for their safety.
I've been working in emergency medicine for 39 years. It went from a specialty that was, you know, very pure and ethical. It was not to make money, it was to serve the public. They sold out to private companies, to lay corporations. Private equity got involved and pretty much got out of hand. The emergency department, which was founded on social justice in a large part of the country, now exists to make money for investors, profits over patients.
You know, I went to the emergency room seeking care, but there was a huge delay in that care and treatment, and as a result, I ended up losing all of my limbs. Bottom line is that the system is broken. It's broken all over the country. It's not isolated to me. It's not isolated to the people that are calling me. It's happening everywhere. People are getting harmed and people are dying.
During the pandemic, emergency physicians were on the front line, exposing themselves to COVID-19, putting their lives at risk, and private equity was cutting their pay, cutting their hours, cutting their benefits. Again, it's a business. Bottom line, while emergency physicians working for Team Health during the pandemic saw pay cuts, Team Health is owned by the Blackstone Group. The CEO of the Blackstone Group saw his net worth increase from $13 to $26 billion. So Wall Street's getting rich, doctors are risking their lives and taking pay cuts.
Does no one see the absurdity of this? So corporate medical groups are, in fact, displacing and replacing board certified physicians for cheaper options, which is a symptom of a larger problem. And that larger problem is private equity backed corporate medical groups that are looking to make a profit and to increase the profit margin. And you do that when you decrease what you pay to healthcare professionals. Functioning exactly how a business should function. It's perfect, but it's not functioning the way medicine should function. And that is the problem.
Estimated that over half of the emergency room visits by patients are to ERs controlled by private equity. So you walk into any emergency department, the odds are 1 out of 2 that you're going to be seen by a physician controlled by private equity.
So that's actually a trailer, if you guys were able to see it. It's on our YouTube page. You can take a look at that as well. It's a trailer that we put together over the course of 3 days with a filmmaker who is a significant other of an emergency physician, so understands that issue. He lives in Kenya, or has lived in Kenya for much of his life, and actually just got a pneumothorax in Kenya. So he's doing fine. I assume he did some kind of hang gliding or something, typical emergency medicine spouse. And unfortunately couldn't fly back here because of the pneumothorax to shoot the rest of it, at least at this juncture. But we do have some approval and funding actually from AAM to shoot a real short film, and are considering a documentary along those lines. So let me also just mention that tomorrow we will be, we're just getting started. I think 2 days is plenty. I probably tried to cram too much into these 2 days. So I really, really appreciate everybody else here, all of our speakers and the people who've stuck through this day. We're gonna go ahead and let Mo Kasich jump back on, and then spatial chat, whomever is still available, feel free to jump on. We'll probably be sort of in that space for a couple of hours, and just sort of meander just like you would at an after party. And tomorrow will be Physician EM Empowerment Day. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about how do you escape corporate medicine for yourself, and some really innovative practice models, and really like how do you get good care for yourself and your family in this new world. That would be great for our patients, but something that I think we can start with ourselves. We really have to understand it ourselves in order to communicate it to our patients.